Have you ever looked at the life you were living and wondered who it really belonged to? What if everything you were told to want wealth, status, legacy came with a cost you could never repay? What if saying yes meant betraying yourself and saying no meant losing everything? William Ashford, heir to a billion-dollar empire, was dressed for the perfect engagement to a woman he never loved. Meanwhile, Eleanor Harper, a hotel cleaner, working double shifts to stay afloat, was just trying to make it through another shift unnoticed. Their worlds were never meant to collide. But in one unexpected moment underneath a banquet table, in the shadow of flashbulbs and false smiles, they did. And what followed was a choice, not between love and duty, but between truth and survival. If it were you faced with the weight of generations, with expectations so loud they drowned your own voice, what would you do? Would you walk away from a golden cage into the unknown? This is a story about courage, connection, and what it truly means to belong not to a family name, but to yourself. If this stirs something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin the story of the cleaner and the heir. The ballroom still shimmered, even after the last guest had long gone. Golden sconces cast a warm glow across the polished floors, and the air smelled faintly of roses, cologne, and champagne. A faint echo of laughter and string music still lingered in the high ceilings, like ghosts reluctant to leave the party behind. But Eleanor Harper didn't belong to the world of champagne and silk gowns. She belonged to the world that came after. Her sneakers squeaked faintly on the marble floor as she pushed a cart piled with linens and leftover glassware. Her back ached. Her feet throbbed. She paused to pick up a lipstick-smeared napkin near the grand piano and tossed it into the trash bag without thinking. After 8 years of cleaning luxury hotel ballrooms, her body moved on instinct. She tugged her hair into a loose bun, sighing as she looked around the aftermath of the night's event, a glamorous engagement party hosted by the Ashford family, the kind of affair that made headlines and whispered rumors. All that was left now were wilted centerpieces and forgotten party favors. "People spend more on flowers in one night than I do on groceries in a month," she muttered to herself. She bent to gather a crumpled ribbon from beneath a long silk-draped banquet table when something caught her eye. Two expensive shoes, Italian leather, midnight black, gleaming under the cloth like a magician's failed trick. Eleanor froze. Her heart jumped, not out of fear, but that deep, primal instinct that tells you something's off. She glanced around the empty ballroom. The place was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. No sign of movement, no security, no other staff. Just her and the shoes. She crouched slowly, her hand hovering near the edge of the tablecloth. "Please don't be a dead body," she whispered to no one in particular. "Not tonight," summoning every bit of courage she had. Eleanor lifted the heavy cloth and found herself staring into a pair of wide, frightened eyes. A man young, disheveled, and striking in a way that made her brain briefly forget to work was lying curled beneath the table like a child hiding from thunder. His tuxedo was wrinkled. His hair fell across his forehead in chaotic waves. A bow tie hung around his neck like he'd given up on trying to be perfect somewhere in the last hour. "Jesus," Eleanor exhaled. "You're not dead." The man blinked. "Not yet. No." Eleanor slowly lowered the tablecloth back down and stood upright, rubbing her temples. "I need to stop watching murder mysteries." The man spoke again from under the cloth. "Are you with security?" She laughed a quick, dry chuckle. "Do I look like I'm with security?" She gestured at her cart full of trash bags. Silence. Then the cloth rustled, and the man cautiously peeked his head out. He sat up, wincing slightly, and leaned back on one hand as he looked at her, then the ballroom, and finally the exit sign glowing faintly in the distance. I didn't think anyone would still be here. I'm always still here, Eleanor said. That's the job. He studied her for a moment, not with judgment, just curiosity. Then he offered a sheepish smile. I'm Will. William Ashford. The name hit her like a slap. Ashford, as in Ashford Hotels, as in the grandson of Helen Ashford, the woman who practically owned half the city's luxury real estate. Eleanor blinked. You're the guy this party was for. The groom. Will's smile faltered. Allegedly. Eleanor crossed her arms. So what? You decided to skip your own engagement. He sighed and leaned his head back against the table leg. It's complicated. She raised an eyebrow. You're hiding under a table in a ballroom wearing a tuxedo. You don't get to say it's complicated without at least offering a better explanation than that. He looked at her. Really looked at her. She wasn't glamorous, or poised, or even particularly gentle, but there was something about her calm, grounded, like she belonged in the world in a way he never quite had. My family, my grandmother, he started slowly. They want me to marry Margot Langley. Her father owns the bank that backs our new expansion in the Caribbean. The merger would make our hotel empire unstoppable. Eleanor frowned. So you're marrying for what? Better financing. He nodded. That's the short version. And you didn't get a say. He hesitated. I've learned that saying no sometimes just changes the way they phrase the question. Eleanor stared at him. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to laugh or curse out loud. Wow, she said at last. You really are in trouble. Will looked down at his shoes. The polished leather had scuff marks now. I just needed to breathe, he said. And I didn't know where else to go. This felt safer. Under a table, she asked. He gave a half shrug. Better than on a stage being paraded like a prize. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then let out a long breath. Well, I hate to break it to you, but this is also where people store trash. Fitting. Their eyes met again. A beat passed. She didn't know this man, but she recognized the expression in his eyes. A quiet desperation. A longing for something more than duty. Something real. You planning to stay under there all night? She asked gently. Will looked up at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something else crossed his face. Hope. Only if you'll help me get out of here. Eleanor didn't say yes right away. She stood there, arms crossed, the soft hum of the ballroom filling the silence between them. Will was still half sitting beneath the table, tuxedo wrinkled, hair tousled, looking nothing like the man in the photos splashed across society pages. You want me to help you sneak out of your own engagement party? She asked, slowly. Will winced. When you say it like that, it sounds more ridiculous than it already is. It is ridiculous. I know. He looked up at her, not with arrogance or entitlement, but with something rare in a man like him, vulnerability. Eleanor sighed, her fingers tightening around the handle of her cart. She'd spent years learning how to survive in silence. Stay out of sight. Do the work. Collect the check. Keep your head down. She wasn't in the business of helping entitled rich boys dodge responsibilities, but something about this one. There was a crack in him, and not the kind that made someone weak, but the kind that made them real. She rolled her eyes. Fine. But if anyone asks, I had nothing to do with this. Will grinned, relief washing over his features like sunlight after a storm. You won't regret this. I already do. 10 minutes later, Will stood awkwardly behind a linen cart, now wearing an oversized maintenance jumpsuit that Eleanor had found in the supply closet. His Rolex was tucked inside her backpack. His hair was flattened, and she'd managed to smudge a little dirt on his cheek for effect. "You look ridiculous," she said. He straightened his posture instinctively. "Nope," she snapped. "Too confident. You're not a billionaire right now." Remember, Will slouched. Worse. He tried again. Shoulders hunched, eyes down. Eleanor nodded. "Better. You might actually pass for someone underpaid." He gave her a sideways glance. "You're enjoying this? Maybe a little?" They moved through the back corridors of the grand Ashford places Eleanor knew like the back of her hand. The maze behind the glamour. The world guests never saw. As they walked, Will kept glancing around like he'd stepped into another universe. "I had no idea any of this was back here," he whispered. "Of course you didn't. Is that a nap room? Sometimes we work 16-hour shifts." He nodded, slowly. "I've stayed in this hotel more times than I can count. I've never once thought about the people who keep it running." "That's the point," she said softly. They passed the laundry area, then turned toward a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and lemons. The overhead lights flickered as they walked. Eleanor paused outside a service elevator. "This is it," she said. "Straight down to the parking garage. Once we're out, you're on your own." Will looked at her. "You're not coming." She shook her head. "This is as far as I go. I've got bills to pay, and I kinda like not being unemployed." He hesitated. "I get it," he said finally. "You've already done more than I had any right to ask." There was an honesty in his voice that made her chest tighten. The elevator doors opened with a groan. She started to push the cart in when she heard it. "William." The voice was sharp, unmistakable. "Margot Langley." Will stiffened, eyes wide. Eleanor grabbed his arm and shoved the cart in front of him. "Push!" They slipped into the elevator just as Margot's heels clicked into view around the corner. "Push the damn button," Will fumbled for the panel, jabbing at the glowing G just as the doors began to slide shut. Through the narrow gap, Eleanor caught a flash of icy blonde hair and fury in designer heels. "William, what are you doing?" The doors closed. Silence. Both of them breathed out in unison. Eleanor leaned against the back wall of the elevator, heart pounding. "Well," she muttered. "That was subtle." Will let out a laugh. It was the first genuine sound she'd heard from him since they met. "I think she saw me. I know she saw you. She probably thinks I've lost my mind. Have you?" He looked at her. His smile faded, replaced by something softer. "I think maybe I'm finally finding it." The elevator jerked slightly as it descended. Eleanor watched the numbers change on the panel. "You know this isn't going to end well," she said quietly. "I know. They'll come after you. I know that too. And after me." That made him pause. "I'll handle it," he said. "You shouldn't have to pay for this." She didn't answer right away. "Then you're right. I shouldn't. But here we are." The elevator chimed. The doors opened to a dimly lit parking garage. The air was cooler here, tinged with the scent of gasoline and rain-damp concrete. Will hesitated at the threshold. Eleanor turned to him. "Well, go. Be free, or whatever." He didn't move. "I don't know where to go." Eleanor blinked. "What, I don't have keys? Or a wallet? Or a plan?" She stared at him. "You seriously didn't think this through? I was hiding under a table in a tuxedo. Thinking clearly wasn't exactly my strength tonight." She groaned, rubbing her forehead. "You rich people are exhausting." He gave her that look again. Earnest, apologetic, human. She sighed. Fine, you can ride with me to the street, but that's it. Will grinned again. That's all I need. They stepped out into the quiet garage, two mismatched souls heading towards something neither of them could name yet. The storm hadn't even started, but something told Eleanor this wasn't just a ride. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The parking garage buzzed with the low, steady hum of fluorescent lights. Eleanor's battered sedan sat tucked in a far corner, parked beside a gleaming black Mercedes and a silver Porsche that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. The contrast made her car look even smaller, like a tired old stray beside show dogs. She hit the unlock button. The car chirped once, its right blinker flickering weakly. Will opened the passenger door carefully, as though the car might protest. He folded himself into the seat with some difficulty, knees nearly brushing the glove compartment. "This is cozy," he said, trying to be diplomatic. "It's a 2008 Civic with a broken air vent and no Bluetooth," Eleanor replied, sliding into the driver's seat. "So yes, cozy is a nice word." She turned the key. The engine coughed, choked, then came alive with a sound like a lawnmower clearing its throat. "Don't insult her," she said, patting the dashboard. "She gets the job done." Will smiled faintly. Outside, the city pulsed with early morning quiet. Streetlights blinked overhead as they exited the garage, slipping into the still dark world where only delivery trucks and night owls roamed. They drove for a while in silence. The windshield wipers squeaked across a thin layer of drizzle. Will leaned his head back against the seat. "I feel like I've fallen out of a story someone else wrote for me," he said quietly. Eleanor glanced at him but said nothing. He continued. "For as long as I can remember, everything was mapped out. Which school, which job, who to date, when to marry. And if I ever tried to change the script, they'd just rewrite it around me." He looked over at her. "Has your life ever felt not yours?" Eleanor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Yes," she said after a pause. "When my dad died, I had to drop out of college to help my mom raise my little brothers. Every plan I had gone overnight. For a long time, I wasn't living. I was surviving." Will was quiet. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "You don't have to be. That's just life. For people like me." The honesty in her voice landed harder than any lecture. It wasn't bitter, just real. Will shifted in his seat. "And yet, you're the one helping me escape." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Life's funny like that." They stopped at a red light near a 24-hour taco truck parked beside a laundromat. Steam rose from the metal cart. The smell of grilled onions and charred meat filtered through her half-open window. Will's stomach growled audibly. Eleanor turned to him. "When's the last time you ate real food? Not catered canapés or artfully smeared foam on a cracker. I mean, food." He blinked. "Define real food." She put the car in park. "I'm gonna show you." 5 minutes later, they sat side by side on the hood of her Civic, plastic plate between them, tacos wrapped in foil. The city buzzed softly around them, early buses groaning to life, distant sirens, the occasional shout from a street corner. Will took a bite, eyes wide. "Oh my God," he mumbled through the mouthful. "What is this chorizo? Cilantro? Jalapenos?" Eleanor replied, sipping from a glass bottle of soda. "And magic." He stared at the taco like it had just taught him something about the universe. "I've eaten in Michelin-starred restaurants on 3 continents, and somehow this is the best thing I've ever tasted." Eleanor grinned. "Yeah, well, welcome to reality." Will chewed slowly, then fell quiet. After a long moment, he asked, "Do you ever wish you could trade places, live someone else's life?" "No," she said simply. He looked surprised. "Not even for a day. I've seen what that life looks like up close," she said, nodding toward the luxury hotel in the distance. "And it's not for me. But it's easier. Maybe, but easy doesn't mean better." Will finished the last bite and wiped his hands on a napkin. "I envy you." She laughed. "You're sitting on the hood of my $1,200 car, eating tacos with a woman who works night shifts and uses coupons." "I know," he said softly. "That's what I envy." She went still. Will leaned back on his hands, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city haze. "You have something I don't," he said. "Your life may not be perfect, but it's yours. You make your own choices. Every scar, every smile, you earned them." Eleanor swallowed hard. No one had ever put it like that before. Will looked down at the sidewalk, then back at her. "I want that. A life that belongs to me." A wind picked up, rustling the napkins and blowing his hair slightly out of place. "You really think you can walk away from it all?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to go back." She watched him, her expression unreadable. "Then you'd better figure out where forward is." Will nodded slowly, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but the quiet understanding that two people who lived in different worlds had found the same ache, the ache of wanting more, not in things, but in meaning, and maybe, just maybe, in each other. The last of the tacos had disappeared. The plate was empty, save for a smear of salsa and a lone cilantro leaf stuck to the edge. Eleanor tossed the trash into a nearby bin and leaned back against the hood of her car. Her eyes followed the steam rising from the taco truck as the vendor began wiping down his grill, humming an old tune that drifted like smoke into the early morning air. Will sat beside her, elbows on his knees, head down. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. And for once, neither was she. "Do you think they're still looking for you?" she asked, breaking the quiet. Will didn't look up. "Probably. I imagine Margot is raising hell by now." Eleanor gave a dry smile. "She didn't strike me as the patient type." "She's not," he said, then paused. "But she's efficient, tactical, just like her father." There was no bitterness in his tone, just fatigue, like someone listing items in a suitcase they never packed themselves. "So why agree to marry her?" Eleanor asked. "You're an adult, Will. No one can force you." He finally looked up. "You'd be surprised what people can do when your life is tied to things they own." Eleanor met his eyes. "That sounds a lot like a prison." "It is," he said quietly, "except the walls are velvet, and the doors are made of glass." He picked at a thread on the jumpsuit he still wore, one of the sleeves too long, the collar rumpled from his fancy shirt beneath it. "My grandmother controls the trust, the business, my entire future, technically. As long as I follow the plan, the money flows, the properties stay in my name, my credit works. And if you don't," Eleanor asked, "I get cut off." Just like that. He said it like someone who'd rehearsed the outcome 100 times but never said it aloud. "Cut off means what?" "Exactly," Will gave a small shrug. "No more penthouse, no more cars, no more access to the private account. I still have a few stocks in my own name. But the Ashford holdings, those vanish with one signature from her." Eleanor exhaled, slow and quiet. Most people she knew didn't have anything to lose. They were born with nothing, worked to earn a little something, and hoped they didn't lose that. But Will, he was facing the collapse of an entire identity. "She's your guardian?" she asked. Not legally, but in practice she's the matriarch. Everyone in the family bows to her, and I was always the obedient one. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You don't strike me as obedient. He chuckled, bitterly. That's because you're meeting me on the first night I ever said no. The city lights flickered in the reflection of his tired green eyes. I spent 28 years being the golden boy. Always dressed right, said the right things. I learned early that obedience got rewards. You rebelled. You lost things. So I played the game. Eleanor tilted her head. And tonight, he looked down at his lap. Tonight, I couldn't do it anymore. I stood there, on that stage, with Margot beside me, cameras flashing, my grandmother beaming, and I felt like I was disappearing. The sentence hung in the air like fog. Eleanor let it settle before replying. Sounds like you weren't running from a wedding, she said softly. You were running to yourself. Will looked at her, startled by how much truth lived in her words. You ever disappear like that? He asked. Eleanor stared ahead, her jaw tightening slightly. I disappeared the day my mother stopped seeing me as a daughter and started needing me to be a parent. She said, I was 19, college freshman. One phone call later, I was back home juggling shifts, raising my brothers, making rent. Did anyone ever thank you? She laughed once. Moms don't thank daughters, they expect. And honestly, I didn't do it for gratitude. Then why? She paused, eyes far away. Because I was the only one who could. Will was silent. He didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No layers, no performance, just truth. Raw and simple. Eleanor turned to him. You ever done something not because it made sense, but because not doing it would have broken you? Will thought about the table, the breathlessness, the panic in his chest when Margot smiled for the cameras. Yes, he said. Tonight. The two of them sat in that shared silence, two people from different galaxies, joined by one fragile thread of honesty. It was Eleanor who broke the silence again. So, what now? You've made your grand exit. What's next? Will didn't answer right away. I don't know. That's not a plan. I've never needed a plan before. Well, she said, folding her arms. Welcome to the 99%. Will smiled. It's more unpredictable than I thought. It's more real than you've ever had. He nodded slowly. A gust of wind lifted a napkin off the ground, sending it tumbling down the sidewalk like a paper bird. Eleanor watched it float. There's a couch at my place, she said suddenly. It's not a penthouse, but it's warm. You can sleep there tonight. No strings. Will blinked. You're serious. You need a place to crash. I have one. I'm not going to let you sleep in a car, even if it's my car. He hesitated, as if weighing the risk of intruding on her world. But Eleanor just stood up, brushed off her hands, and headed to the driver's seat. Come on, golden boy. Let's get you somewhere less philosophical. Will followed, quietly. And as he sat back in the Civic, he realized something strange. He wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe he wasn't lost. He was on his way home. They pulled into a quiet street lined with old brick buildings, their facades weathered but proud, the kind of neighborhood where folks still nodded to each other over steaming mugs on stoops, where laundry flapped from fire escapes and late-night lights told stories behind thin curtains. Eleanor parked her car in a tight space between a pickup truck and a battered van with a missing hubcap. She killed the engine. The silence that followed felt softer than the silence they'd shared earlier. This is it, she said, tugging the keys from the ignition. Welcome to Casa Harper. Will looked up at the narrow building. Is that your landlord's name on the door? No, Eleanor said, cracking a tired grin. It's a joke. My last roommate used to say every apartment deserved a name. Makes it feel like a place, not just a pit stop. She led him up 4 flights of stairs. The elevator was out of service, had been for the better part of a year, based on the faded paper sign taped to its doors. By the third landing, Will was winded. He didn't say anything, but Eleanor heard his breath catch. Don't worry, she said. The altitude sickness kicks in around floor 5. He chuckled, though his legs were starting to question every decision he'd made that evening. She stopped at a forest green door and unlocked it with a quiet, practiced rhythm, 3 clicks, 1 shove. The door creaked open, and Will stepped into a world unlike anything he'd known. The apartment was small, maybe 600 square feet, tops, but it pulsed with something his penthouse never had: life. Mismatched throw pillows crowded a faded couch that looked like it had heard 100 bedtime stories. A tiny kitchen hugged one wall, its fridge covered in photos held by novelty magnets, smiling faces, messy cakes, graduation caps, backyard barbecues. Fairy lights hung loosely around the window, casting a warm, imperfect glow across the hardwood floors. Potted plants hung from ceiling hooks and lined the windowsills. Some thrived, some looked tired, but still trying. Like people. Books were everywhere in crates, on shelves, stacked beside a lamp that leaned ever so slightly to the left. Will turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's, he started. Cluttered Eleanor offered. No, he said softly. It's home. She watched him for a beat. Something in his voice caught her off guard. He sounded like a boy who had just remembered what warmth felt like. Eleanor set her keys in a chipped ceramic dish and moved into the kitchen. You hungry again? I've got leftovers. Or cereal. Or that weird frozen thing I keep meaning to throw out. I'm okay, Will said, stepping over a pile of mail stacked neatly by the door. This is amazing. She shrugged. It's small, but it's mine. Will moved toward the bookshelf, trailing his fingers across the spines. Romance novels pressed up against biographies. Cookbooks beside poetry. A worn textbook on hotel management stuck out near the top. He pulled it down. You're studying. Eleanor looked over her shoulder, filling the kettle at the sink. Night classes, she said. 1 course a semester. It's slow, but I'm getting there. Why hotel management? She set the kettle on the stove, flicking the burner on. Because I've cleaned every corner of one, she said. And I figure, if you want to build something better, you've got to know it from the ground up. Will looked at her like she was a puzzle he'd only just started to understand. That's incredible. She laughed. It's exhausting. He smiled, then looked down at the floor. Do you mind if I... She followed his gaze to the couch. It folds out, she said. But the mechanism's busted, so you'll have to embrace the lump. Lump it is, he said, pulling off the oversized work boots he'd borrowed earlier. Eleanor disappeared into a small hallway, re-emerging with a spare pillow and a folded blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. Will laid back on the couch and sighed. Not the kind of sigh that comes from stress, but from release. From finally putting something down after carrying it too long. I've stayed in some of the finest hotels in the world, he murmured. But this is the first place I've ever felt safe. Eleanor paused by the kitchen. That's the lavender spray. It's a scam, but it works. They both smiled, a quiet warmth settling between them. She brought over a mug slightly chipped, bearing the words "World's Okayest Employee," and handed it to him. Tea, she said. No wine pairing. Sorry. He took a sip, and his face changed. This is better. She sank into the armchair across from him, curling her legs beneath her. The city buzzed outside the window, but inside, everything was still. You can stay, she said suddenly, breaking the calm. For a night, maybe two, but you'll need a plan. Will looked at her over the rim of the mug. That's fair. I'm not your fixer. Will, I saw someone drowning. That's all. I didn't ask for saving. He said, I didn't say you did. Their eyes met, and something passed between them again. Not romantic. Not yet, but something real. Something solid. Will leaned his head back on the cushion and looked at the ceiling. I think I'm going to sleep for a week. Eleanor stood, taking his empty mug. You'll get 3 hours. I'm working the early shift tomorrow. He closed his eyes. Tyrant. Freeloader. She walked to the kitchen and set the mug in the sink. Behind her, Will's breathing evened out, and Eleanor stood there for a moment, watching the quiet hum of her apartment wrap around him. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, just tonight, this stranger in a borrowed uniform, who used to belong to the clouds, was here, in her world, where things were cracked, worn, and beautiful, because they were real. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the sky was already beginning to pale at the edges. That quiet hour between night and morning when everything feels softer, suspended in something sacred. Eleanor sat at the small kitchen table, chin resting in her palm, watching the kettle boil. Will was still asleep on the couch, one arm flung carelessly over his forehead, legs tangled in the blanket. He looked peaceful, almost boyish. No sign of the man who had hidden under a banquet table just hours ago. No trace of the weight he carried. She let her gaze rest on him for a moment too long, then turned away, quickly. Don't get attached, she told herself. He's not staying. The kettle hissed. She poured the water over instant coffee, took a sip, and grimaced. Too bitter. Too early. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Marcus Grant. Night manager. Grand Ashford Hotel. Her stomach dropped. She picked up the phone but didn't answer right away. The buzzing stopped, then started again. Another call. She swore under her breath and walked quietly into the hallway. Away from Will. Her thumb hovered, then pressed accept. Marcus, she whispered. His voice was low, urgent. Eleanor. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. It's barely 5. I know. Listen, this is serious. She swallowed. What happened? There's been complaints. High level. The Ashfords. The Langleys. They're saying you were involved in some kind of, he paused, choosing his words, incident last night. She closed her eyes. They know. Not everything, but enough. You were seen leaving with someone who matched William Ashford's description. He was in disguise, and someone still recognized him. Eleanor's heart pounded. What are they saying? They're calling it interference, breach of conduct, possibly worse. The lawyers are already circling. She leaned against the wall, the chipped paint cool against her back. I didn't kidnap him. Marcus. He chose to leave. I know, he said gently. But you know how this works? It's not about the truth. It's about power, influence. And they've got more of both. Silence stretched between them. Then, they want to meet with you. Today. Executive office. 6:30 sharp. That's in 90 minutes. I'm sorry. Eleanor forced her voice to stay even. Am I getting fired? I don't know. She nodded, even though he couldn't see. I'll be there. She ended the call and stood in the hallway for a long moment, breathing through the panic creeping up her spine. Then she turned. Will was awake. He sat up slowly on the couch, the blanket bunched around his waist. His hair was a mess, his eyes, still cloudy with sleep, locked onto hers. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then she crossed the room, grabbed her jacket off the hook by the door, and said flatly, "They found out." Will stood, instantly alert. What did they say? "They're calling it a breach of conduct. Possibly more. I have to be at the hotel in an hour." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'll come with you." "No." "Eleanor?" I said no. Her voice was sharp, more than she intended. She softened. "You showing up would make it worse. You don't get to fix this with a speech and a trust fund." I gave that up. "Remember?" She looked at him. He stepped closer. "I dragged you into this. I won't let them punish you for helping me." She shook her head. "You didn't drag me into anything. I made a choice. And now I live with it. Let me stand beside you." She exhaled. "If you walk into that office, they'll say you manipulated me, that you used your position. They'll make me small, weak, like I didn't have agency, like I couldn't say no." Will's jaw tightened. "I'm not hiding," she added, "but I'm not handing them any more ammunition." He looked at her, eyes conflicted. She picked up her bag, pulled the strap over her shoulder, and moved to the door. Will reached for her wrist. "Eleanor." She turned. His hand was warm around hers, gentle, unsure. "If this goes badly, if you lose your job, what then? I adapt," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. That's what real people do. She pulled gently from his grasp. "I'll be back." And just like that, she was gone. Will stood frozen in the middle of her tiny apartment. The clock ticked quietly. The plants near the window caught the morning light. He looked around at the space she called home, a world held together by hard work and stubborn hope. And for the first time, he realized she wasn't the one who needed saving. He was. The Grand Ashford looked different at 6:30 in the morning. The grand chandelier was still lit, but its shine felt colder. The marble floor, always gleaming, now echoed with an eerie emptiness. No music, no guests, only tension. Eleanor walked across the lobby, her footsteps sharp and steady, though her stomach twisted in quiet knots. She wore the same black slacks and button-down shirt she'd worn 100 times. No makeup, no mask. She wasn't here to impress. Marcus Grant was already waiting near the elevators. He looked tired, more rumpled than usual, tie slightly askew. When he saw her, he offered a quick nod. "I'll walk you up." They stepped into the elevator. He pressed executive level. The metal doors slid closed. Marcus spoke without looking at her. "I tried to talk them down. I know. There are a lot of people in that room. I figured. They're not here to ask questions," he said quietly. "They're here to make a point." Eleanor didn't answer. She already knew. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to a long hallway lined with glass walls and tasteful art pieces, oil paintings of mountains and oceans that meant nothing. At the end of the hall, a conference room, a war room. Marcus opened the door for her. Inside, at least 8 people turned to look. At the head of the table sat Helen Ashford, immaculate, composed, her silver hair swept back like a crown. Beside her, in an ivory suit, with an expression like a frozen lake, was Margot Langley. Her mother, seated 2 seats down, held a leather folder and wore a pinched, controlled smile. Eleanor stepped in. Her presence felt like a drop of ink in a glass of water, instantly visible, instantly unwelcome. "Miss Harper," Helen said without preamble. Thank you for coming. Eleanor gave a small nod. Of course. Margot didn't look at her. She looked through her. Helen gestured to an empty chair across the table. Eleanor sat, spine straight. You were working during the engagement celebration last night, Helen asked. Yes. You encountered my grandson. William? Eleanor met her gaze. Yes. According to security footage, you were seen exiting the ballroom with a man who was later identified as Mr. Ashford in disguise. Is that correct? Yes. Margot scoffed. So you admit it. Helen held up a hand. We're not here to accuse yet, she said coolly. Eleanor remained still. I didn't force him to leave. He came to me. He was hiding under a table. That drew a few eyebrows. Under a table, Helen repeated, tone unreadable. Yes. I thought he was unconscious at first. When I realized who he was and that he was alive, I asked if he needed help. He said yes. Margot's voice was sharp. And you thought help meant smuggling him out dressed as staff. I didn't smuggle him. Eleanor replied, evenly. I gave him a chance to leave with dignity. That silenced the room for a beat. Then Margot's mother leaned forward. Miss Harper, you do realize how serious this is. Our families have invested millions in this merger. Your interference may have irreparably damaged. I didn't interfere with a merger, Eleanor interrupted, voice calm but firm. I responded to a person in distress. Margot glared. He's not just a person. He's an Ashford. And your actions have consequences. Eleanor looked at her. So does silence. Helen raised a hand again. What exactly did William tell you? She asked. He said he couldn't breathe, that he needed to get out, that no one would listen. Helen's face didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Margot's voice climbed. You manipulated him. No, Eleanor said, still calm. I listened. And then what Margot asked, arms crossed. He fell in love with the cleaning lady and ran away to start a new life. Eleanor didn't flinch. He needed someone who saw him as more than an asset. That's all. Margot leaned back, disgusted. This is absurd. Helen finally spoke again. What did you think would happen, Miss Harper? That you could sweep away decades of legacy with kindness and borrowed coveralls? Eleanor looked her dead in the eye. I didn't think about legacy. I thought about him, as a human being. Silence again. This time, longer. Then Helen said quietly, Leave us. All of you. Margot bristled. Excuse me. Helen didn't repeat herself. Margot stood, angry but controlled, and walked out with her mother and the others. Marcus hesitated, but Helen gave him a nod. When the door closed, only Eleanor and Helen remained. The room was suddenly too quiet. Helen folded her hands on the table. I built an empire, she said, brick by brick, deal by deal. Do you know how many people I had to silence to keep it standing? Eleanor said nothing. My grandson is idealistic, soft, in ways he doesn't like to admit. He thinks the world should be fair, but it isn't. Eleanor's voice was low. Maybe it could be, if people like him weren't always told to be quiet. Helen studied her, a long, considering gaze. Do you love him? The question came so unexpectedly. Eleanor blinked. I barely know him, but you see him. Eleanor nodded. And he sees me. Helen looked away, toward the glass windows where the sun was beginning to rise. Then she sighed. Go home, Miss Harper. We'll be in touch. Eleanor stood. Am I fired? Helen didn't answer right away. Then, not yet. Eleanor turned to leave. As her hand touched the door handle, Helen spoke again. You may have more power than you realize. Eleanor paused. Then she left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, and the war continued in silence. The elevator ride down felt longer than the one going up. Eleanor stood alone, arms crossed tightly, her reflection fractured in the polished chrome walls. Her face was calm, but inside, the storm churned not of fear, but of something else, conviction. When the doors opened, she stepped into the lobby like a soldier returning from battle. Marcus was still there, pacing near the concierge desk. When he saw her, he hurried over. "Well?" he asked, eyes full of quiet worry. "I'm not fired," she said. "Not yet." He exhaled. "That's something. They'll think about it," she added. "They'll spin it," he corrected. Eleanor shrugged. "Let them." Then, just as she was about to leave, the front doors of the hotel burst open. Will Ashford stepped inside. No disguise this time, no jumpsuit, no fake slouch. He wore the tuxedo shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair still messy, eyes sharp with purpose. Behind him, the sunlight poured in like he was walking out of a dream and into a fight. Every head in the lobby turned. Eleanor's heart stopped. "What is he doing?" Marcus whispered. Will's eyes scanned the room until they found her. He walked toward her, fast, determined. "Eleanor," he said. She held up a hand. "Will." "No, this isn't." But he didn't stop. "I don't care what they say," he said, voice clear, cutting through the silence. "I'm not going to let them threaten you. Will, listen to me. I have listened. To them. My whole life. And it got me nowhere. People were gathering now. Staff. Guests. Even security. Please," she whispered. "Don't make this worse." He turned, raising his voice. "Everyone's acting like I lost control, like I was kidnapped. But the truth is, for the first time in my life, I chose gasps, whispers." Will looked directly at the glass office where Helen Ashford still sat. "And I'm choosing again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Then slowly he removed a sleek black titanium card, the Ashford Access card, the symbol of power, of inherited control, and he dropped it into the hotel's decorative fountain. A single splash. A moment that cracked the silence like thunder. "I'm done being your brand," he said, louder now. "I'm done being your business strategy." Helen rose slowly from her seat inside the office, her face unreadable. But she was watching. Will turned back to Eleanor, voice softening. "You told me once that surviving doesn't mean you're living. You were right." Eleanor stood frozen, stunned, shaken. "And if this means starting from zero, with nothing but truth," he added, "then maybe that's finally something." Margot Langley appeared at the top of the lobby stairs, flanked by her mother, rage carved into every line of her face. "You absolute fool," she hissed, storming down toward him. "Do you have any idea what you've just thrown away?" Will turned toward her, calm. "Yes," he said. "Everything that wasn't mine to begin with." He looked back at Eleanor. "But this moment, this choice, this is mine." And for the first time in his life, no one interrupted him. No one corrected him. No one moved. Even the security guard stood still. A pause. Like the whole world was holding its breath. Then Eleanor stepped toward him. Not running. Not theatrical. Just, sure. She reached out, and he took her hand. Two people, finally free, finally seen, together. The crowd parted silently as they walked toward the door. Will didn't look back. Neither did she. The hotel, the empire, faded behind them, and the sun outside felt real, not a spotlight. but light, warm, honest, and entirely unfiltered. They didn't speak for a while. The sun had fully risen by the time Will and Eleanor reached the end of the block. The city felt different now, less like a stage, more like the world had taken a long, deep breath. Eleanor's hand was still in his, but there was tension in her shoulders, not romantic tension, not anger, something quieter, heavier, reality. She stopped walking. Will turned to face her. "What now?" she asked. It wasn't a question about direction. It was about everything. Will looked around at the narrow sidewalks, the flickering streetlight above a deli, the rusted fire escape stretching up into the skyline. "I guess we figure it out," he said. "That's not a plan," Eleanor replied softly. "I know." She let go of his hand and crossed her arms. Not cold, just self-protective. "Will, I need you to understand something." He waited. "You made a bold move back there. It was brave, honest. But this isn't a storybook ending." He nodded slowly. "I know. You just gave up a life most people dream of. And now you're walking straight into one they wake up from." He let her words settle. She wasn't trying to shame him. She was grounding him. "I wasn't living before," he said quietly. "I was floating." Eleanor looked at him. Hard. Floating is better than drowning. Will smiled faintly. Not always. A breeze picked up, pulling her hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear with a sigh. "You hungry?" she asked, not unkindly. He blinked. "After all that, yeah," she said, looking down the street. "There's a diner 2 blocks over. Cheap coffee, good eggs, no paparazzi." He grinned. "That sounds like heaven." They walked in silence again, the kind that no longer felt awkward. When they reached the diner, the bell above the door jingled like an old friend. The space was cramped, the booths worn smooth by years of elbows and coffee mugs. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Doris nodded toward an open booth. They slid in. Eleanor ordered black coffee. Will asked if they had oat milk. Doris raised one eyebrow. He changed to regular. They sat across from each other, fingers curling around mismatched mugs. "You okay?" she asked finally. Will considered it. "I feel like someone just erased a chalkboard I didn't even know was there," he said. "Now it's all blank, and I'm holding the chalk." Eleanor gave a small smile. "Scary." "Yeah. Good." They sipped in silence. The diner's radio crackled quietly in the background, something old and twangy about broken hearts and open roads. Will leaned back. "I never realized how noisy my life was until it got quiet." Eleanor nodded. "Quiet makes you hear things you were avoiding." Like what she met his gaze. Like whether you're actually proud of the person you see in the mirror. He didn't look away. "I wasn't," he said. Eleanor stirred her coffee. "And now I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I want to be." She looked at him a long moment, then said softly, "That's a start." Their breakfast arrived greasy, comforting, exactly what they needed. Will picked at the edges of his plate. "So what about you?" he asked. "What happens if they fire you?" Eleanor took a bite of toast, chewed thoughtfully. "Then I find another job. That's simple." She shrugged. "It has to be." He hesitated. "What if we built something?" She paused mid-bite. "Built what? I don't know yet. But what if we started with what you already know? Hotels, service, what not to do, and added something better." Eleanor blinked. "You want to start a business?" "Why not?" he said. "You've already taught me more about real hospitality than any executive I've met." She raised an eyebrow. "You have no money." "Will, I've got a few stocks I didn't give up." I've got friends who owe me favors. I've got time. For once. Eleanor leaned back, watching him. He wasn't joking. And more than that, he wasn't dreaming. He was planning. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone who had finally stepped out from behind the curtain. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no, either. Instead, she looked out the diner window, where people passed by wrapped in their own ordinary stories, and she wondered, for the first time in years, if hers might be changing, too. It had been 4 days since the hotel, 4 days since the car dropped into the fountain, since the looks, the whispers, the silence that followed them out the door. Will had slept on the couch each night, despite Eleanor offering her bed more than once, not out of romance, but because the couch was lumpy and unforgiving. He refused. He said he needed the lumps. Each morning, Eleanor went to work, at a local cafe now. Nothing fancy. No name tags. No uniforms. Just strong coffee and tips in a glass jar with a smiley face drawn in permanent marker. Will walked her there the first day, then waited outside to walk her home. Every day after, he joined her inside, helped scrub counters, learned to make espresso, even burned a croissant or two. "I'm getting better," he'd say. "You're getting flour everywhere," she'd reply. But she smiled when she said it. At night, they sat in her living room, laptop open, notepads scattered, ideas scribbled in all caps and crossed out in frustration. Modern inhospitality, but human the unbrand. Nothing stuck, but something was growing. They weren't planning a hotel. They were rethinking why hotels exist, why people sleep better in some places than others, why comfort wasn't about thread count but about being seen. One night, Will said quietly, "What if it starts with one building? Just one? Maybe in a small town, where people remember your name, not your reservation number." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Call it," what Will grinned, "Casa Harper." She threw a pen at him. Later that week, they went to meet an old friend of Will's, Dylan Moore, early 40s, former Ashford exec turned real estate agent for reformed rich kids, as he called himself. They met at a half-abandoned inn 2 hours outside the city, shutters falling off, roof patched with plastic, but the bones were good. "This place has been on the market for years," Dylan said. "No one wants to touch it." Eleanor walked the hallways with care. The rooms were dusty but intact. The dining room had a fireplace. The courtyard grew wild herbs through cracked stones. She turned to Will. "This could work." He nodded. "I think it already is." Dylan smirked. "You too sure about this? No investors, no brand name, no cushion." Will looked at Eleanor. She gave him the tiniest of nods. "We're sure," he said. They signed the initial papers on the hood of Dylan's car, using a pen with a plastic daisy glued to the cap. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was theirs. Back in the city. Will checked his phone. One message from an unknown number. "You'll regret this. H.A." He deleted it without reading further, then turned back to Eleanor, who was sketching floor plans on a napkin. "Lobby or library?" she asked. "Both," he said, and she smiled. Because in this new story they got to choose. Not for escape, but for something real. It rained on the day they opened. Not a storm, just a steady, thoughtful kind of rain, the kind that softened everything it touched. It soaked the roof, tiles of the old inn, turned the gravel path into a tapestry of puddles, and tapped gently on the windows like an old friend asking to come in. Inside, the fireplace crackled to life. Eleanor adjusted a vase of wildflowers on the front desk, lavender, marigolds, and one stubborn daisy that refused to face forward. She let it be. Not everything had to be perfect. Will emerged from the back hallway, carrying a hand-painted sign, "Welcome to the Hearth." Not a brand, not a logo, just a word, a feeling, their feeling. Eleanor nodded as he placed it above the entry. The paint was still a little smudged, but it looked right. The building smelled of lemon oil, old wood, and fresh muffins from the oven. Eleanor's recipe, passed down from a neighbor, passed down from someone else before that. They had 6 rooms. 3 were ready. One still had a leaky window. Will had tried to fix it himself and ended up soaked, laughing. Eleanor had thrown him a towel and said, "Well, the guest gets a view and a breeze." There were no bookings yet, no website, just a handwritten notice in the window and a word-of-mouth promise passed between townsfolk. And still, by 10:15 that morning, someone knocked at the door, a woman, maybe 60, a warm face, tired eyes, a rolling suitcase and a quiet smile. "You open?" Eleanor stepped forward. "We are now." The woman glanced around. "Looks peaceful." "It is," Will said, appearing behind the desk. She studied him. Then Eleanor. Then the daisy in the vase. "I'll take 2 nights. Room 3. The one with the crooked lamp and the quilt Eleanor had sewn herself." They handed her a brass key. No key cards, no passwords. Just trust. That night, they sat on the porch under the awning, listening to the rain fall soft over the trees. Will held a mug of tea. Eleanor had a blanket draped across her lap. The inn glowed behind them. Soft lights, warm voices from the guest room, the faint sound of someone playing an old tune on the piano in the lounge. "I keep thinking someone's going to show up and take it all back," Will said quietly. Eleanor looked at him. "They won't." "You sure she sipped her tea?" "No, but I'm here anyway." He smiled. "Remember when I said I wasn't proud of who I was? Yeah, I think I am now. Not because I built something, but because I finally stopped hiding." Eleanor leaned her head back against the wood of the porch post. "There's something sacred about building something small," she said. "Something you can actually hold, see, touch, something real." Will added. A pause. Then Eleanor whispered, almost to herself, "I think we saved each other." The rain fell steady. The world didn't change, but they had. And that was enough. Not perfect, but true. And sometimes true is everything. Sometimes. It's not the loudest moments that change us, but the quiet ones. A hand reached out. A voice that finally said, "I see you." Will didn't need a throne. Eleanor didn't need saving. What they both needed was someone who looked beyond the surface and chose to stay. Because in a world still too quick to divide by class, status, or surname, this story reminds us of something simple yet powerful. Kindness is not weakness. Dignity does not come from a name. And no one deserves to be looked down upon because of where they came from or what they wear to work. So, if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever had to fight for your place in a world that didn't make room for you, this story was for you. And maybe it reminded you that love, in its truest form, does not climb social ladders. It breaks them down. If this story touched you, don't leave just yet. Please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every tale is a mirror, and every heart deserves to be heard. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep choosing what's real.